What is fascinating is that companies who can reinvent themselves, they almost all of them need a near-death experience before they actually do something.
Aye, oh, let's go. Aye, oh, let's go.
Welcome at the podcast behind MarTech’25, the event that we were having today. My name is Hans, Strategy Director and Partner at IO. And with me I have Peter. Peter, nice having you.
Well, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Well, I'll start with the good news. I'm not going to ask you any questions about whether AI is a bubble or which of the magnificent seven would be the brand you would gamble on. So I'll leave it at that. What we do try to do today...
We'll put that in the side notes. Huh?
Yeah, good. Yeah. That's a good one. What we do try to do is make it more practical for Belgian, Dutch companies, European companies to see what makes sense. How can they try to navigate? You talk about uncertainty, which is kind of a clear giving direction of what it means when navigating. Because if there is no certainty, how to navigate. Starting from that, you come on the stage, there's always a lot of things that you do know. There's a lot of things you don't know. How do you cope with uncertainty? Does it become a habit?
Well, I think I became really interested in that subject of uncertainty because... maybe it's part of the aging process. Maybe it's about seeing almost 3 decades on companies trying to cope with change. And if there's one conclusion is that there is never a stable moment, and it seems to be like stability is further away than ever before. And I became obsessed with the idea: do we have more uncertainty? Because it certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
I mean, in my world of technology, I literally turn on my phone every single morning and I think, really? That just happened.
Yeah.
If you see the amount of things that happened in 2025 in that technology world, it's been the craziest year ever. But it would be really stupid to think, but next year it's going to become easier. Huh?
Yeah.
So I became really fascinated with the idea that we shouldn't hope for more stable times. Maybe we should learn to use uncertainty. And I think that is the fundamental thought that I now have, because when you look at that, constant change, constant volatility, constant uncertainty, many people get frightened. They get anxious and they say, should we try and mitigate the risks? Should we hedge our bets? And I say, no, what you have to try to do is use that to your power. You have to leverage. A really bad way to phrase it is you have to learn how to weaponize uncertainty. But that's a loaded word in these days. Yeah.
But does that resonate when you enter a board meeting room with people who are maybe risk averse?
Well, I think, first of all, is not all boards are risk averse, thank God. Huh?
Okay.
And I spend a lot of time, talking to, companies, boards, management teams, trying to convince them of that message. And I think first there is a certain skepticism because how do you learn how to use uncertainty? But when you try to make that more tangible, and often what you see is that a lot of the concepts that we have, a lot of the mechanisms, a lot of the governance that we have in companies just don't make sense anymore in this world of constant change. I call it the never normal, a world of constant change.
Could you give one example?
Well, I'll give you one example, which is budgets. And I always make the jokes that budgets are yearly sarcastic corporate rituals where people put fake news in Excel that is consolidated into something which never works.
Yeah.
And when you use that example, many people say, oh my God, look at 2025. In November 2024, all the companies in the world created the budget 2025, and they spent an enormous amount of energy, resources, talent, blood, sweat, and tears building the budget of 2025.
Yeah.
Then Trump, has Liberation Day and introduces the tariffs, and by April you could flush all the budgets down the toilet. It didn't make sense anymore.
True.
And for me, a budget is a great example of things that we keep doing because we've always done it that way. They are rituals from the past, but I think we need new mechanisms to deal with a world that is going to be more volatile and more uncertain than ever before.
Yeah. And based on this uncertainty and the fact that it's difficult to predict what's going to happen, you still have a business to run, right? So looking at the companies you see, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies doing at this stage?
Well, I think the mistakes are one thing. I mean, and very often you see is that it's staying close to what you're comfortable with, because that has served you so well in the past without really having the capability to anticipate and look ahead. And it's a very common mistake. It's virtually every company falls into that trap once they become a certain size and age. And my previous book was called The Phoenix and the Unicorn. And that was about how companies could reinvent themselves. And what I found there is that, I mean, a unicorn, which is a new player, they're going to take every opportunity to get ahead. They're going to look at everything outside that can help them. And it's because they are so cash strapped. They have no legacy, no shit of yesterday. Of course they want to go ahead. Yeah. But a traditional company has these patterns, and these patterns become a straitjacket. Yeah. And, I mean, all the excuses that big companies have why they can't do that, but it often starts with not looking ahead, not looking outside of their comfort zone. And what is fascinating is that companies who can reinvent themselves, they almost all of them need a near-death experience before they actually do something. Okay. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Microsoft. I think Microsoft is 50 years old. I think it's maybe the prototype Phoenix. I think Satya Nadella is maybe one of the strongest CEOs of the century. Microsoft is 50 years old. It went through all the stages, startup, scale-up, unicorn, before we had the names for that. And then it became a monopolist. And 15 years ago, Microsoft was a really boring company. It could only turn out mediocre products. And it's not because they didn't have the technologists, they had the engineers. But I think when Satya Nadella came on board, he said, we probably have 8 Googles inside of Microsoft, but they don't get out anymore. We have smothered them in bureaucracy and mediocrity. And what Satya Nadella did is a brilliant example of a company that has been able to reinvent itself. But they almost lost it. I mean, Amazon was first to the cloud. Microsoft had to catch up. And I think Satya Nadella came at the right time to reinvent that. But the sad part, the sad answer is most companies need to have an almost near-death experience before they really change. Yeah.
Let's try to prevent that to the viewers and the listeners.
Absolutely.
But I do think we understand that companies are struggling. Is it okay to have that sentiment? Because it might not be the near-death experience, but it might give you some sense of urgency just to move forward.
But I think the sense of urgency is crucial. And I always say that you need to build that sense of urgency without scaring people. Because it's so easy to be spooked now with everything that's going on. I mean, look at the world of AI. I mean, many people are anxious about their jobs. I mean, what's going to happen to work? Or what's going to happen to employment? I mean, you're now in a situation where the job market is really... I read the cover of The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago. The job market is hell. All the students are using ChatGPT to write their CVs and resumes. HR is using ChatGPT to read them, and nobody's getting hired. This is a pretty scary situation, right? Yeah, it is. But I think that you have to build that sense of urgency without scaring people. Yeah. And I think this is a fascinating world where you clearly see different leadership styles on how to address that. I mean, one of my favorite companies in the world is Walmart, the biggest retailer in the world. And I had a chance to be very close to their transformation over the last 7 years. And I met them 7 years ago for the first time, and I really didn't want to go there because their headquarters are in Bentonville, Arkansas, middle of nowhere. And I thought, they're kind of a retailer from the past. And when I came there, I was blown away. And they have been transforming like crazy, understanding that the world is a different world, that consumers are different, that marketing and connecting and engaging is different than in the past. And it's been amazing to see that. And it is very closely correlated with the leadership. I mean, Doug McMillon, who's the CEO of Walmart, is one of the best CEOs I've ever seen. And for example, he says on AI, you know what? This is going to change literally every single job in our company. And they have 2 million employees. Okay. But he said, it's my responsibility to get everybody from where we are to where we have to get. Wow. And that means a passion and an engagement. And if you have that openness and transparency as a leader, but at the same time, you're reassuring that you're going to do everything to get everybody to the other side, I think that's what you need, and that's the spirit. So.
Yeah. Now, okay, there is this sense of urgency. Then you think about transformation. Does it start with the vision, collecting your data, the mindset? How do you go about it?
Well, I think we're at a very interesting phase in how companies transform. And the reason is that for the longest time, whenever there was something new, and whether that is, say, digital, 10, 15 years ago, or it was even the advent of, say, IT 30 years ago, every time there was something radically new, we would say, we have to understand that new world. And we have to do an as-is assessment, and we have to do a to-be vision, and then we're going to have to figure out how we go from here to there. Roadmap.
Yeah.
I don't think that works anymore. And I think we're now in a situation where things are starting to change so quickly. And there is such volatility and velocity in these changes that I don't think the old as-is to-be journey still works.
Okay.
I think what we might need to do is start preparing organizations for a world of constant change. And how do we build structures, organizations, platforms, technology that is designed for change? Not just to say, that's the new thing. Once we're there, we'll be fine.
No one-stop solution, and we'll stick to it because it becomes a legacy, actually.
It becomes a legacy faster than ever before. Okay. I mean, that's the funny thing. I mean, I've been in technology for 30 years now. I remember when everybody was sick and tired of their old IT systems, and then everything became web-enabled, and the whole mobile. And now those are the new legacy systems. And I'm quite sure that whatever companies are building in AI is going to be the legacy systems of next year.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to try and avoid is to do that step approach, but find a way to do that on a continuous basis, to build ideas and concepts designed for change. And I think that is a fundamentally rethink of how we do transformations.
Okay. Now, is it too late if you start today?
No, it's never too late. I mean, that's the worst possible thought that you could have.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting to have a head start, but even that could be sometimes a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, I just last week I had a meeting with a chief information officer, CIO of a pretty big company, and he said, it's terrible. He said, we were very early to the game. We did a complete analysis of the entire AI landscape, last year, and we said, that's it. This is what we're going to do. These are the tools. This is the platform. Now he says, we're 11 months into the new year, and we think, oh my God, we have to start all over again.
Yeah.
So I don't think it is the wrong timing to start, but you do have to get started.
Okay. This being said, talking about uncertainty, I think AI only amplifies uncertainty.
It's an accelerant.
Yeah. At the same time, you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
You also talk about resilience. It feels like resilience is really becoming a thing with people having to deal with uncertainty. Any advice you could give for companies on how to deal with this resilience?
Well, I think it's one of the core challenges of the 21st century. And I think one of the complexities is that I don't think we have been really good at preparing people for that. I think whether it's in your upbringing or in your education, we didn't focus on resilience. But I think that creative resilience, that insatiable curiosity you need to have, that's what we need to nurture. And unfortunately, we haven't built organizations for that. We have built organizations for scalable efficiency. That's basically what we've done. And we've been really good at that. And that was the mantra of the 20th century. I mean, that was the Jack Welch's, right? Six Sigma, and everything was scalable efficiency. I think what we need to do now in the 21st century is build organizations for scalable learning. And that's a completely different approach. And I think, the idea now that you can study for 3, 4, 5 years at, a university and be prepared for life is a joke, right? Because things change so quickly. Look at the world of computer. I'm a computer scientist. I mean, if you teach AI in your first year at university, that knowledge is completely obsolete by the end of the year when you have to give it an exam. I mean, it's that velocity.
Yeah.
So I think building companies for scalable learning, I think, is one of the crucial ways to deal with that.
And maybe also really accepting that failure is the best way to become resilient and to learn.
Yeah, and I think that is, an integral part of that. This is something where the startups have a head start because they understand that. I think it's basically their modus operandi because that's the only way they can work, by trying and experimenting. But I really believe that we're now in a situation where the cost of doing goes to zero. I mean,
I love that slide, by the way.
And I think it's true. I mean, honestly, we were in a situation where if you wanted to try something, you needed to build a project plan. It would take months and then
MVP,
years to implement. We're now going to a situation where the cost of doing basically goes down, goes to zero, but the cost of waiting goes up. And that, if you match that with the right mentality, mindset, and curiosity, learning from these experiences, I think you have a tremendous opportunity.
Okay. There is a lot of chaos going on. Any things you can say to the viewers like, okay, there is chaos, but let's look at the opportunities based on, is it the technology? Is it starting with AI? Is it looking at some of what competitors are doing? Where do you start?
Well, I have a very simple rule for that in the sense that I wrote a book on that called The Day After Tomorrow. How much time do you spend on today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow? And today is the hundreds of things that eat up your day. Huh? The emails, the SMS, the Slack channels, the team calls. We got used to back-to-back meetings during COVID, and it only got worse afterwards. But then there's the tomorrow thinking, and that's often like the budgets. It's where we extrapolate our comfort zone. But then there's what I call the day after tomorrow. These are things outside of your normal, realm. These are things outside of your corporate walls. These are things where you can learn from that might be new ideas or new technologies or new business models, but it's new ways to look at the world that you think you know.
Yeah, something you were not aware of.
Yeah. And I always say, if your ratio today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow is 70, 20, 10, I think you're fine. But 10% means that if you work 40 hours a week, that's 4 hours. If you work 50 hours a week, that's 5 hours. Can you carve out the discipline of spending 4 to 5 hours every week?
Which is a lot.
It seems like a lot. And the reason is because we're dragged down by our today thinking or the shit of yesterday. And I think if you don't have that discipline, it's going to be very difficult because you need to invest in that. And I always say the 10% is just an indication, right?
Yeah.
But if you start to understand the necessity to carve that out, then I think you've made the first step.
Okay. And do you think agencies like IO could play a role in companies? Just maybe it doesn't have to be 4 hours, but just looking at what is potential out of your own box?
Well, I think so, because I think the relationship between customers and agencies is changing as a result of all this. But I think maybe even more than just playing the role of execution, I think playing the role of a challenger or helping companies look outside of their normal realm or helping them augment the power of that 10% could be a very interesting role for agencies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think based on today's conversations, we have created awareness. People get excited, but also a bit scared. But maybe that's exactly what we need. Taking actions is now the next step. And I hope we've handed them with some very practical learnings. And let me end with what you said. Once you know, you cannot unknow. So now you know, people. Start moving ahead. And we'll wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Aye.